All right, everybody, welcome to Chapter 10, which deals with managing global human resources locally. This is the 10th of 11 chapters, so we're slowly grinding away at these, and after this one, there's one more, and we'll be completed the content in the course. Good stuff. Okay, so let's jump right into it then, and look at the first key idea here. So, key idea, I'll read this really quickly. Organizations with global operations need to adapt their HR practices to accommodate different cultural, educational, political, legal, and economic realities in the countries in which they operate. So these days, a lot more companies are going outside of the borders of Canada in a lot of ways. So once you go beyond the confines of Canada, and you'll have some human resource issues, and those human resource issues will be different than they are in Canada. You may have, for example, a kick-ass training or a kick-ass selection process that works in Canada, but that same kick-ass training process or same kick-ass selection process may not work well in China, Iraq, or maybe even parts of the United States of America. All right, so the key, to put it really bluntly, is global HR is a little bit of a different animal than just run-of-the-mill domestic HR. Okay, as always, we have learning objectives. There are 4 here. Some first couple deal with sort of some general international business stuff, and the last 2 or 3 deal more with the HR in specific. So we'll get to those as we go through. Learning objective number 1, summarize how growth in international business activities affects human resource management. So there's been quite a bit of growth in international business over the years, particularly in the last 50, and obviously that has an impact on HRM, and we'll tell you how that goes. All right, so we look at human resource management in a global environment. So globalization, okay, can provide new markets with millions or billions of customers. We're way more interconnected than we used to do, even in my lifetime. I can remember back in the 1970s, it was a wonderful time. It was the time of disco, among other things. But also in the 1970s, young Bill occasionally went down to the United States. And when we went down to the United States, we had these amazing, unique products that we couldn't get in Canada. One was called Fritos corn chips. I had no idea what a corn chip was until in the States, and these were just awesome. And another was this fast food restaurant called Arby's, which had roast beef sandwiches. I mean, we had couple burgers from A&W up here, but nothing as wonderful as a roast beef sandwich. So I used to be able to go, even to the United States and find these really unique things. Now, fast forward 50 years later, you go, corn chips, meh. Arby's, big meh, if you've ever been to Arby's lately as well, right? So, yeah, just a lot of these things, just as simple products as fast food or junk food is now globalized, right? Whereas in the past, it was really a unique thing to different countries, right? Okay, so second point, organizations set up operations globally because of lower labor costs. Obviously, sourcing goods from China is probably the really classic example of this, right? So how come you can get a TV, like you can get a really nice TV, or you can get a really low-end TV now for under $100. Way back in the day, a 13-inch black and white TV, I think I paid $179 back in the 70s. So the fact that we can manufacture in a lot of these lower cost places around the world has really helped with the cost of goods. Stuff is cheap. And 3, so advances in telecommunications information technology have facilitated the growth in international business. Just to give you an example, again, back in the 70s, a long distance phone call, would cost you like $2-3 a minute. And that's $2 or $3 a minute in 70s dollars, which is probably closer to $10 or $12 a minute in today's dollars, right? Now, my daughter a couple years ago was in Australia to going to school, and we could video call for how many cents a minute? Well, none cents a minute. It was free over the internet, right? So it's just amazing the advances in telecommunications and information has, really facilitated. You can talk to people face to face for free, where it used to be really, really expensive to do that, right? So the cost of doing business has gone down. All right, so what are one of the drivers in a lot of this global business has been free trade, especially over the last 50 years. Trade barriers have gone down. Lately, ever since the Donald got in the White House, and I think by the time you're watching this, he will have left. Hopefully he's left. Sorry about that. So recently, a long-term trend towards more global has been face disruption, right? So it's taken a bit of a pause. So things like Brexit, Britain's leaving the European Union, trade wars, particularly with the United States and China. The Donald renegotiated NAFTA. It's now the USMCA. It's basically the same thing. And like I said, U.S. tariffs under the Trump administration and retaliation by its partners. So long term, we've been seeing past 50 years, a lot more international trade. We've had a blip recently. Whether this blip is going to, turn the tide against global agreements, so that sort of remains to be seen. But it's a pretty big trend up until this point here. Okay, so finally got something about HR, right? So if you do decide that you want to operate in a international market, you have three choices with the kind of employees you do. So let's say, for example, you're Jimmy Jojo's, Jimmy Jojo's cactus juice factory. Yeah, let's go with that. All right. And you're going to enter the Chinese market. You're going to have a whole bunch of cactus juice stands in China. Sure, why not? All right, so what can you do? You have three choices for your international workforce. Home country employees. So these would be country in which the organization headquarters are located. So you'd set up your cactus juice stand in China. You'd send over a manager from Canada, and you would staff it also with Canadians to send them over. Okay, so Canadian company employs a Canadian manager in its Mexican operation. Host country employees, country or country other than home country, the country other than the home country in which an organization operates this facility. So using the same example, I'm going to set up a cactus juice stand in China. So I'm staffing it with a Chinese manager and Chinese employees. Or you can have third country employees, and these are country there's neither the home country or the host country. So I'll set up my cactus juice stand in China, and I will have a Mexican manager, and I will have, let's say, Vietnamese employees there. Okay, those would be third country employees. Pros and cons of each. Generally, the pros of home country employees is they really understand the organization, so they really understand Jimmy Jojo's cactus juice company. Host country employees, the advantage there is they really understand the local market. So Chinese employees may not know cactus juice really well, but they really know the local Chinese market. So you ask yourself then, why would you ever hire a third country employees? Well, third country employees, these tend to be people who are experts in the industry. So your Mexican manager that you send over there to China, he might be an expert in cactus juice, and also he's an expert in international business. So he's done this before. When your competitor set up its operations for cactus juice in Vietnam, this manager was doing that. So he's an expert both in the industry and sort of an also expert in business, international business. So that's what why you might want to employ a third country employee. Okay, so essentially what you're trying to do is you're balancing company knowledge and experience with local knowledge and experience. Levels of global participation. So you can decide how all in you want to be with this whole international or global thing, and it ranges from domestic all the way to global. All right, so the first thing, and they really didn't show it here, the first entry, let's use entry into international business is often exporting. So if you were Jimmy Jojo's cactus juice company, and you would start by, well, we'll just, export a whole bunch to the United States and let somebody else sell it, or export a bunch of cactus juice to China and let a distributor there deal with it. Okay, so that's known as a domestic, domestic business with exporting. International, you have obviously your domestic part, but then you set up a foreign subsidiary. So we've got Jimmy Jojo's Cactus Juice Canada Inc., and you set up a subsidiary, Jimmy Jojo's Cactus Juice China Inc. A multinational is really just a bigger form of international, so you have several different subsidiaries. So in addition to Jimmy Jojo's China Inc., you have Jimmy Jojo's India Inc. Is India Inc.? India Inc. That's a thing, isn't it? India Incorporated, and Jimmy Jojo's Zimbabwe Incorporated. Okay, so you have multiple subsidiaries. And the final one, the ultimate one, would be a global one. So you have a global headquarters and you have foreign subsidiaries, but these foreign subsidiaries do more than just run that particular country, right? So probably the best example of a company that's a global company, you take an auto manufacturer like Ford. So sure, Ford's corporate headquarters would be located in the United States, but its design, okay, and it would have, it would have automobile plants in a number of different places. So in Great Britain, and in Zimbabwe, and Japan, and even China. But the difference here is some of these other functions that would normally be in the corporate headquarters may be distributed to foreign subsidiaries. So you might do your design over in Europe. You might do your marketing over in the United States. You might do your finance in Switzerland. All right, so yeah, that's the difference between this one and here. Instead of just having the mothership here and everything comes out of the mothership and you've got the foreign subsidiaries, in a global organization, some of the functions normally associated with the corporate would be associated in other areas in the world, if that makes sense. All right, so there are very few really global corporations. Ford might be one. Nestle's another good example of one, right? Yeah. Okay. And I think what I just did on that last slide was described exactly what this is here, okay? So yeah, just kind of read over this, and this is just really a quick summary of what I just told you in the previous slide. Okay, so let's cycle back then to number 1, Learning Objective 1. Learning Objective 1 says, summarize how the growth in international business activity affects human resource management. A couple things you get here is number 1 is international business is growing. Might be in a little pause right now, but generally the last 50 years the trend is obviously up. When staffing international business, you have 3 choices. You have home country employees, you have host country employees, and you have third country employees. And your participation can vary from starting off by exporting, then going into international, multinational, and finally you get over into a global organization where you have you're truly globally integrated, and you have functions all over the world. Not all your functions are not centered in your home office. All right, get her, got it, good. Hope that made sense. Let's go to number 2. Number 2, identify the factors that most strongly influence human resource management in global markets. Okay, and there are 4 factors, which I'll go over quickly. Culture, education, economy, and political legal. And by far, the most important one is culture. All right. And when we talk about culture, culture is really a pattern of behavior based on written or unwritten rules. Okay, a pattern of behavior based on written or unwritten rules. So, for example, in Canada, generally speaking, particularly if you identify as male, you wear pants. Okay, that's part of our culture. You go over to Scotland, and guess what? Some of the men over there wear dresses. They call these dresses kilts, but that's kind of a normal thing in Scotland. Is you don't necessarily have to wear pants. When you dress up, you can wear a kilt or a dress, as the case may be. Okay, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on culture in the next slide, so we'll come back to this one. But just for this point, remember that culture is really the important one. Okay, there are 4 factors, but culture is really the most important one. Okay, so what else have we got here? Let's talk a little bit about education. So education and skill levels will affect your human resource management, right? So for example, different areas in the world can specialize in different skills. For example, if you wanted to find a kick-ass diamond polisher, where would you go? The answer would be Belgium, because Belgium is sort of the epicenter of the world for marketing diamonds. Okay. Oftentimes, labor markets will vary in skills and wages, right? So if you want to go somewhere in the world and get a low-cost manufacturer, particularly for textiles, usually end up in Vietnam, maybe Bangladesh. Low costs for a lot of other manufacturing has tended to be in China. The other thing about education is if a country has a good education system and speaks English, that could be really attractive for Canadians. So for example, 2 countries in particular, India and the Philippines. India has a lot of people there, so wages are a little bit lower. Their education's pretty good and they speak English. So if you want to outsource an engineering or a computer function, often goes to India. Philippines has a fairly good education system, and they also speak English. They've been really good for if you want to outsource customer service. So for example, like customer service reps, particularly in the off hours, because their time zones are quite a bit different, right? So your education and skill levels will give you some a hint about where you might want to locate your manufacturing. Your economic system, a couple things here, capitalist versus socialist. Okay, so a country like the United States is very much more free enterprise. They'll kind of let you do what you want to do. For the most part, you get into a socialist country, sort of moderately socialist like England, or even communist like Cuba, for example. The government's going to be a lot more in your face than a place like particularly the southern U.S., right? So whether you're the country that you're thinking about selling into or manufacturing in as a capitalist socialist is going to impact your decision. The other example on the economics is sort of your level of development. Okay, so for example, your infrastructure, if the company doesn't have good roads, if the company doesn't have a good telecommunications infrastructure or doesn't have good sea or air links, that's going to hamper your doing business in that particular country, either importing or exporting. Natural resources. Some countries have really good natural resources, like gold mining, for example, or diamond mining. Actually, is a really good example as well, in South Africa, or gold or diamond mining in there, right? They have those are the places to go. You also have wages and income distribution. So some are high cost. Okay, so locating in often places in Europe can be a very high cost in terms of wages. And in terms of income distribution, if you're, let's say you were Lululemon and you were exporting, if you wanted to export to a place like, let's say China, yeah, there's a lot of people there, but a lot of those people aren't at the level of income where they can afford Lululemon. On the other hand, because it's a rather skewed income distribution, there's also a pretty good upper middle class population who could afford a Lululemon there, right? So economic development is important. Political legal system. Okay, so laws dictate HRM requirements. Just to give you a couple of examples. Here's kind of a funny one. In the United States, in the state of Oregon, you cannot pump your own gas at a gas station. There are no self-serve gas stations. Go figure. All right. Yeah. So if you wanted to, if you were an oil company and you wanted to, Canadian oil company, and you wanted to distribute or open retail gasoline stations in the U.S. state of Oregon, you're going to be paying more labor. Interesting stuff. Cayman Islands, okay, which is a small island in the Caribbean. In order to operate a business there, it has to be 50% owned by a local. So really nice place, really nice tourist industry there. But if you're going to open a business, you're going to have to find a local partner. Sweden, okay, which is also, this is customs and the law. The annual vacation entitlement is a lot more than in Canada. I think it's like 4 or 5 weeks. When typically in the United States, a lot of places, it's only 2 weeks, right? So what's the point? The point being is a political legal system will affect your HRM requirements, particularly among things like employment standards. Okay, as promised, we're going to take a little bit deeper dive into culture. And again, with these cultural, we'll go through these things here, Hofstadter's, and by the way, Hofstadter's kind of a big deal, so knowing these 6 things are kind of important, particularly if you ever take an international business course. You'll need to know these in excruciating detail here. But they are generalizations, right? So we can say that, okay, well, Japanese people tend to be like this, or Chinese people tend to be like this, or Mexican people tend to be like this one. And they are, remember, keep in the back of your mind, these are generalizations. I have a good friend of mine, Chris, who was born in Haiti. And both his parents were people of color. And so you would look at Chris and you'd be really surprised at the fact that this guy grew up in Haiti, but he's a huge country and Western fan. All right. But, using Hofstadter here, they would say, well, Haitians, aren't real country and Western people. All right. So let's dive into these now. So Hofstadter basically has 6 dimensions on how you can analyze a culture. So the first dimension is individualism versus collectivism. Who's more important, the individual or the group? So to give you an example, Canada and the United States are a much more individualistic culture, whereas a place like Japan is a more collectivist culture. So individuals more important in Canada and the United States, group more important in Japan. Power distance, the importance of formality, status, class. You want a good 50-cent word, the degree of egalitarianism. Whew, roll that one around. Let's repeat that again, egalitarianism. So a country that is really egalitarian is informal, not very hoity-toity, don't have a lot of respect. I guess we would say respect for upper class versus lower class. So a very egalitarian country would be a place like Denmark. On the other hand, you have countries that are really more formal, class, status is really important. An example might be the Philippines. Okay. Uncertainty avoidance. So how comfortable are people with the unknown? Okay. A country in Europe known as Greece is probably low on uncertainty avoidance, so people don't like to take risks. A company like Jamaica is very high in uncertainty. It's like, yeah, it's all good, man. All right. So yeah. So the amount of risk that you want to take. So Greece would be on one end, low risk, and Jamaica would be high risk. Masculine versus feminine. So do you have a real macho culture or do you have a softer culture, right? Two ends of the spectrum. Mexico tends to be more of a masculine culture, and a place like Sweden or Norway more of a feminine culture. Okay, or feminine is probably a better way of feminine is both gender neutral might be even a better one versus masculine in when you're looking at both ends of the spectrum. Long-term versus short-term orientation. So are people, I want it now, or, sorry, I want it now, short-term orientation. Or, yeah, well, I can kind of wait, you know. I can hang in there and good things happen in the long term. Typically a place like China has more of a long-term outlook, Chinese people. Short-term orientation, Canada, the United States, particularly the United States. I want it and I want it now. Or in terms of business, you're worried about the next quarterly profit rather than the long game in 5, 10, 15 years. Similar to that is the degree of indulgence versus restraint. So the indulgence is me, I want it now. And restraint is, that's okay, I can wait. All right, so it's kind of similar to this one here. So, or you could think of a lot of bling, okay? So yeah, if you like a lot of bling, you like a lot of really flashy, a lot of money. Money is really important. You have an indulgent culture. Restrained culture is basically, yeah, you're just a lot more conservative and not flashy. So examples there, US tends to be more an indulgent customer. A more restrained culture tends to be India. Okay, interesting stuff. How does that affect the workplace? Okay, well, it can affect a number of things. Pay fairness, appropriate communication styles, team versus individual jobs. So they've got a pretty good description in your textbook. I'll give you a couple of quick examples here. One of the things you'll see in the next chapter, which deals with high performance work systems, they'll talk about self-directed work teams, where you don't really have a boss. You just sort of get together as a group and figure it out. Where would that work well? Well, if you look at power distance, okay, a country that's really egalitarian, okay, which isn't big on a lot of this stuff, self-directed work team would work really well in a place like Denmark. In a place like the Philippines, where they're used to having bosses tell you what to do, status in class is important. If you tell people, well, go figure it out on yourself, they're going to be lost because that's really not part of their culture. They're just used to a boss telling them something. What about a commission system? Okay, so a pay versus you get paid on a percentage of what you sell. The more you sell, the more you make. Where would that work well? Well, if we take a look at individualism versus collectivism, individualist system like a selling on commission would work really good in an individualized society like the United States. Not so good in a place like Japan. All right. Cool. So let's cycle back then. Take a look at learning objective 2. Okay, identify the factors that influence HRM and global markets. And those factors were culture, which was the most important one, education level, economy, and the political legal environment. All right, now we're on to learning objective number 3, which states here, discuss how international operations impact human resource practice, including workforce planning, selection, training, development, performance management, rewards, and labor relations. So in this learning objective, we take a look at exactly how things are different when we're working in a global context for human resource for the various practices. Okay, so we'll start with workforce planning, which we did way back in chapter 4 here. So workplace planning in a global economy, decisions about the level of participation in a global economy. All right, so if you think back to the first learning objective we talked about, you might start at exporting, and then eventually you might progress all the way to having a global operation there, right? So that's the first decision. Are we just going to export, or are we going to go all the way to being a global company here, right? Decisions about this, a lot of them are dealing with money, so cost and the availability of workers. So if we're going to put a plant in China, for example, how much is that going to cost? Okay, in terms of so in terms of wages, and in terms of taxes, and in terms of raw materials, all the good things you covered in your economics course there. And are there people available there? Outsourcing might be the answer. And the other key thing is flexibility to reduce the workforce when needed. In some countries, once you hire someone, if you need to get rid of them or you need to downsize them, the costs can be quite a bit more expensive than they are in Canada. Like, for example, in Alberta, we have in the first 3 months, you can get rid of anybody for any reason. That's not necessarily so in other countries when you're dealing with, workers. Okay, so the second one here deals with staffing. Okay, and in particular, when you're looking for people to take those foreign assignments, to be expats, all right, to be home country nationals, right? So I'll tell you a little bit of story. I know 2 really good friends that I've had who've done this, and with quite a bit different outcomes. One was, and they're both engineers, and they're both oil field engineers. One we'll call Steve, mostly because his name was Steve. So he was an engineer, really good guy, really competent engineer. I looked at him, his personality-wise, he was very optimistic, he was confident, he was adventurous, he was a real half-full sort of guy. The other friend that I had who took an international assignment, he was also a oil field engineer. His name was Richard, or we'll call him Richard, mostly because his name was Richard. And he was a little bit different. He was a single guy. He was kind of socially awkward, really nerdy kind of guy, really a little bit OCD. I mean, really good guy, but just in terms of social skills, not anywhere near the social skills that Steve had. So what happened? Well, Steve moved his family, him and his wife and his 2 young kids, and then they spent about 4 or 5 years in Indonesia, and they had just an awesome time. Richard, he went to Saudi Arabia, and one of the reasons he went was the fact that they were downsizing at the time, and he really didn't have a lot of choice here. So he ended up lasting, I think, somewhere around 2 months before he came home. It was just a disaster, huge culture shock, and ended up in counseling when he got back, and soon after he left the company there. So it was just like a total disaster, right? So when I thought about those 2 guys, I kind of looked at this list and I thought, well, let's take a look at this list and sort of put this against them, right? So competency in their area of expertise. So both Richard and Steve, they're both really good engineers. Ability to communicate. So this can mean sometimes even being able to speak the language of the new place. It's not always necessary to do that, but that's helpful. And again, I think I'd have to give that to Steve. He was a little better communicator. Flexible and tolerance for ambiguity. Now, Steve was kind of a, he was a flexible guy. He could sort of let things go. Richard, on the other hand, tended to be a little more rigid. Sensitivity to cultural differences, again, because Steve was more of a outgoing, kind of adventurous sort of guy. He had more tolerance for that. Richard, not so much. Both had quite a bit of motivation to succeed. I think both enjoyed challenges. Both these guys were runners, and they certainly enjoyed the physical challenge of running. Both willingness to learn, and this was a big one, support from the family. Steve was there with his family. His wife and his kids looked at this as a real international adventure. Richard basically was there alone in the compound, right? So um, I guess the bottom line on this is if you're looking for good people to be home country nationals, um, certainly hard skills, technical skills are important, but a lot of these soft skills like flexibility, sensitivity to cultural differences, support from your family are really the key thing that can really make or break your assignments. Okay, that's the staffing part. The next part that is a little bit different for global human resource management is training and development. So special challenges with training and development. You might have, like I said, a kick-ass online program for, I don't know, training power engineers or something like that in Canada, and that may or may not work well when you go to China or where you go to Iraq or Saudi Arabia, right? So a lot of those, it can be the technique, the media, and the language, and the cultural issues could be a lot of those to try to take a Canadian program and put it in there. The other challenges you look at is you're looking at training people that your home country nationals before you send over there, things like culture shock and language. And we'll go to that in detail in the next slide here, right? But essentially, this is much like anything in human resource management. There is you just can't expect to take something you developed for the Canadian market and necessarily use it without adjusting it for the international market. Okay, cross-cultural preparation. So this slide speaks to what you do if you're training your home country nationals to go. So you need to prepare both the employees and their families for the global assignment, right? I mean, it can be something as simple as, you know, going to the grocery store in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be quite different than, you know, just taking the car down to the Save On Foods or the superstore like we do here in Medicine Hat, right? First of all, you might not be able to drive in that particular country to start with. But anyway, so we talk about preparation for the experience. We look at three areas: sort of before, during, and after, right? So when you're type of things, preparation for departure, language instruction, and cultural orientation. You don't want to make any cultural faux pas when you go to your new country. It's a good word, eh? Faux pas. It's a French word. Second one, when you're there itself. So combination of formal programming and mentoring. It's a good idea to pair the new home country national, somebody who's already there, who kind of knows the ropes, right? Much like you would do in an orientation program at, you know, at a regular job. And then this one here, which may not appear obvious, but preparation when return home. So actually, when you come back, people have to acclimate back to their old job. So there's going to be some culture shock returning home, and you have to prepare for that, right? So the other way to look at this is also employees come from Canada and other countries also need cross-country. So if you're bringing people in from another country to Canada, you also need to do this stuff sort of from the other end. Okay, let's talk about performance management a bit across national boundaries here. General principles apply, but there are specific things like legal requirements, local business practice, and national cultures. Okay, so like, for example, which behaviors are rated? Eye contact might be something. If you rate customer service representative on their eye contact, that might make perfect sense in Canada, but somewhere like Japan where staring people in the eye is rude, you know, you'd have to rate different things like eye contact, for example. How performance is measured, whether you do it on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, once a year. Some cultures are going to want more frequent feedback. Some cultures probably less feedback. Who performs the rating? Again, you do peer ratings, for example, when you do a 360 degree performance evaluation, right? So in an egalitarian, I love that word, society like Denmark, peer rating would be fine. If you're in a more formal society, somebody like India, the fact that a peer rating isn't going to have the same impact as a rating your boss or your boss's boss gives you, right? Because there's a lot more prestige, a lot more yeah, importance given to positions in a non-egalitarian culture. And type and how feedback is provided, direct versus indirect, right? So in Canada, if you've got a really good relationship with the employee, you know, you could say, hey man, you really sucked out there the other day, and they're not going to take that really too bad, if you know, depending on the person, right? But generally speaking, you can be more direct with some people. In some other countries, you have to be indirect, right? Well, you could have done this quite a bit better, okay, rather than hey, you suck. So again, how you give the feedback can be important there, right? So those are some things with performance management. Next two slides deal with money, compensation, beaucoup dollars here. All right. So a couple things. Pay structure. Market pay structures may be different in terms of pay level and the relative worth in jobs. In Canada, school teacher is a fairly good paying middle-class job. Down to the southern U.S. or even a Midwestern state like Wisconsin, U.S., teachers are paid nothing, okay, next to nothing. In fact, a lot of teachers have to take a summer job to make ends meet, like they're waiters or waitresses. Sorry, I guess we call them servers now in the summer, right? So depending on where you are, yeah, relative worth of jobs may be different, right? Engineer is a well-paying job here in Canada. In India, there's lots and lots of engineers. Okay, so the relative worth isn't as much there. The other part here, incentive pay and benefits and services. Yeah, if you want to go to a war area, you're going to need to pay for that, I guess. And I'll get into this more in the next slide. But the general principle on this stuff is if somebody's taking an international assignment, you're going to want to make it worth their while. They can't be less well off than they are right now, right? In terms of pay and benefits and things like that. So you've got to, they're doing you a favor here. So, you know, they need to be compensated, you know, at a minimum. If they can't be behind what they're doing, you've got to give them incentive to actually take the position here, right? So you got to look at things like laws, expectations, values, etc. So this next slide just shows you, it's called the balance sheet approach. So areas to look at when you're trying to figure out how much to pay that person, right? So if you look at this first one, it says employees, home country costs. That's what they cost, and the employees cost in the host country, so where they're going. So those costs are going to be higher. So you're going to have to account for higher costs. All right, and this shows you that you try to keep the costs here level here, and then these ones here, the ones without are the parts that the company pays, right? And that's just in purchasing power, right? So you want to make, again, this last one is everything keeps them equal here in terms of costs, and then you want to put a little premium incentive on top of that, right? So again, you don't really have to know this in detail, but the principle is that accepting an international assignment needs to be in employees' interest. So their amount they get paid plus their expenses, you got to end up ahead, which is what this one shows, then with what you're doing. Okay, what else we got on here? International labor relations. So this is the union part. And thing to remember is that the rates of unionization and the type of unionization can be quite different across the world. Okay, and the key thing is when you're dealing with international labor relations, it's really important that you rely on local expertise. So working with host country nationals can be really important here because they're going to understand the ins and outs. Just to give you a couple of examples here, unions. So in the United States, for example, especially the southern United States, unions, it's open season on unions, right? So like I said, they tend to beat up on unions a lot, and the law is not really friendly in the southern states. For example, they have what's called right-to-work states, and in a right-to-work states, people don't even have to join the union if they, if the employees by majority have decided they want to unionize. Yeah, they'll let them have a union, but not everybody is supposed to join or compelled to join like they are in Canada, right? So that's the states. On the other hand, you go to a place like Germany, the rate of unionization is a lot higher. The other thing is interesting in Germany is what's called sector-wide bargaining. So what that means is that you have a master contract in a sector or an industry, right? So steelworkers, for example, when we're ready to bargain, is all the steelworker companies get together on one side and all the steelworker unions get on the other side, and you hammer out a master agreement, as opposed to Canada where you have agreements sort of on an employer, usually on an employer by employer basis there, okay? So just note with the international labor relations is the way things run, the laws, the customs, the amount of unionization can be quite a bit different than it is here in Canada. Okay, so to recap that one, this one was all about differences, or what some of the adjustments you'd make. So to recap this, what are we going to say about that? We are going to say, okay, so workforce planning, make sure that you're looking at the costs and the different laws, okay, in order to decide, A, if you're going to go over there in the first place, and B, how that's going to affect your workforce, people you're hiring. Selection, be very careful about the people you select to be home country nationals. Make sure you look at the soft skills. Okay, it's really important. It's not just a matter of the being technical experts. Training and development. Again, you can't take a training program that you did in Canada and just export it without any adjustments. You're going to need to adjust it for culture and language, things like that. The other part of the training and development is make sure when you're prepping your home country nationals that you give them training sort of before, during, and after. Performance management, be aware that some traits or some things are going to be different. Okay, like eye contact, for example, would be perfectly good thing to measure for a customer service rep in Canada. Not so good for one in Japan. Also, who gives the feedback, whether it's a peer or a manager, is important, depending on the culture. Total rewards, again, you want to make sure that it's worth the person's while to take the home country, to be a home country national, right? You don't want them to end up in a worse position in terms of compensation and benefits. And finally, labor relations, the rules and the cultures and the setup of the unions can be quite a bit different in other countries than they are in Canada. Okay, that was objective 3. Let's look at the final objective. Number 4 is explain how employers prepare employees for international assignments and their return home. So this is a little more detail around that, preparing them. Okay, so global relocation, top 2 reasons for failure. Number 1, changing business conditions. Okay, so we went into a country on, with when the economy was one way, and halfway through something changed, or the government was overthrown, or a number of different things. So I mean, that's sort of beyond your control. But the second one here is probably more in your control from a human resource management point of view, is the inability of the family to adjust. So again, make a prepare the family right? And screen the family. Are they looking at it as an adventure, or are they looking at it as a something they have to do? Okay, so a couple things you can do is provide trailing partner career transition services. Ooh, that's easy for me to say. So for example, we talk about Steve when he went to Indonesia. His wife was working with us at Grand Prairie College. She taught a couple courses. So she was able actually to work on her master's when they were in Indonesia. So, and then the company was covering part of that. So that was kind of a, they not only do you have to look after the employee, you also want to look after the partner, which reminds me of the old saying, happy wife, happy life, right? It applies right here. Cross-cultural training is important. Okay, so simple things is how to say hello, or what to do, what not to do, how to go grocery shopping. Career development activities. Again, you want, if there's professional development or you want to keep current technically in your field, those should be available for the people relocating. And another thing is the international assignment letter sets out the parameters. So this is a lot like the offer letter you would get as part of the common law employment contract, but this would just be in particular to the international assignment. Just spell everything out so people are really clear what they're getting themselves into. Okay, the other thing is repatriating. Okay, so coming back, right? So eventually, after you spent your through 2 or 3 or 5 years abroad, you're going to come back to the home country here, right? So you should be prepared for that. Otherwise, you can suffer something called reverse culture shock. I guess the other way to look at it is being an athlete and all, everything for me is a sports analogy here. But let's say, it's like going abroad, being a home country national. It's almost like going to the Olympics, right? So you go to the Olympics and it was this amazing experience, but now you're after the Olympics and you're at home, right? And if you're a runner, so instead of competing in the Olympic final for the 1500s, you are now competing in the Wednesday night Medicine Hat Panthers meets against some of the best runners in Southeast Alberta, which is quite a come down from being at the the Olympics, where the world's best, right? So from somebody coming home from the Olympics, you're going to want to have a plan, okay? If somebody coming home from a different country, you're going to want to have a plan to do that, right? So one of the things is provide opportunities to use the global experience. So my friend Steve, who now knows a lot about Indonesian oil, he can use that thing. So what did they do in Indonesia that we can use over here? Okay, or perhaps maybe there's other people from the country who are going to Indonesia, can use him to help them mentor and train those people. Ongoing communication during the assignment, so receiving information about home office while abroad. So again, if you're away for 2 or 3 or 5 years, you're kind of out of the loop. So again, really reaching out to those people, not forgetting about them, because they eventually have to come back. And when they do come back, providing recognition for completing the international assignment, right? So this could be formal recognition, plaque, bonus, that sort of thing. But it can also be, treating them as experts. Again, the example I gave is maybe these are the people who are going to train the new people who are going to Indonesia or wherever, as the case may be. Okay, so let's recap that one. That was a nice short objective here. Or what do we want to say about objective 4 is to recap. Okay, so 2 things really is you want to have a training plan for the home country national person. And training is things beforehand, like language training, culture training. Training during, like mentoring, having somebody there to show them the ropes, and then training for after. Say, hey, when you come back, you might have some reverse culture shock. So be prepared for those type of things, right? And that last point really dovetails into the second major point is, in addition to preparing them for the assignment, also have a plan for the return. Okay, so let's wrap up this entire chapter. We got a little bit of a summary here. There's 4 different learning objectives. So the first one being international business is growing, And basically, human resource management needs to adapt their practices to new country. The training program you had, which worked great in Canada, might not work as well in Indonesia or Iraq or Zimbabwe. I just love that word, Zimbabwe. It just kind of rolls off your tongue. It's the former Rhodesia in southern Africa. I digress. Number 2, culture, education, skills, political, legal systems, and economic factors influence HRM in global markets. Culture was the big one, right? Okay, if you understand the culture, well, you can adapt your practices, but you also need to know a little bit about the laws, you need to know about the economy, and you need to know about the level of education and skills in the areas that you're going to. Number 3 says HR practices need to be explained and adapted for the global context. So you need to do things differently in terms of workforce planning, in terms of compensation, including in terms of performance management, yada, yada, yada. Go back and just look at lesson 3 there, and they'll give you that. There's quite a couple very good examples on what you need to do. And finally, managers need to prepare employees for international assignments as well as their return home. So before, during, and after. And that's it. That's all for Chapter 10. Chapter 11 deals with something called high performance work systems, and we will cover that next.